Part 1. The harm thesis and the Epicurean challenge. The big question about death sounds simple. Is dying bad for the person who dies? Your gut reaction might be a definite yes. Death seems like the worst thing that could happen to anybody. But this feeling, strong as it is, meets a serious philosophical puzzle that's been on thinkers' minds for over 2,000 years. Epicurus, an ancient Greek philosopher, came up with an argument that's become the core of all talks about death being bad. His reasoning seems flawless. Death means consciousness stops forever. Once you're gone, you don't exist anymore. No feelings, no senses, no awareness. Epicurus asks, how can something be bad for you when there's no you left to feel that harm? As he put it, death is nothing to us, since when we are around, death is not, and when death is there, we aren't. They just don't mix. So death can't really hurt the person who dies. This theory has massive mental health impacts. If Epicurus is right, we're wasting tons of mental energy dreading something that can't truly hurt us. Our fear of death would be pointless, like being scared of a villain who never turns up. We could live peaceful lives, free from what Epicurus called one of humanity's biggest pains, the fear of dying. But Epicurus's viewpoint hits a snag. It clashes with a gut feeling we all have. When a lively 25-year-old dies in an accident, we don't just see the pain in others from the loss. We feel the young person herself has suffered. She had plans, people to meet, things to do. It's not just tragic for her loved ones, it's tragic for her too. Epicurus's take seems to argue against a belief we hold close, that death can be a huge loss for the one who dies. Here's where modern philosophy steps in with what's known as the deprivation account of death's badness. This idea, most notably pushed by philosopher Thomas Nagel, agrees that death isn't intrinsically a bad experience. Being dead doesn't feel like anything because there's no one to do the feeling. But death can still be bad for you another way. It robs you of the good stuff you would have experienced if you kept on living. Picture it like this. Say someone betrays you but you never find out. Your whole life, you think your friend is loyal. The betrayal doesn't cause you pain because you're clueless about it. Still, many would argue that betrayal harms you. It makes your life a bit worse than it would have been otherwise, even though you never feel upset about it. Similarly, death means your life is shorter and missing the bits that could have made it better, even though being dead doesn't feel bad. This is called a comparative harm. Death's bad not because it feels awful, but because it stops your life in its tracks. If you were set for more joy, love, accomplishments, beauty, then death snatches those away from you. The harm lies in what's lost, not in what you feel. Think about Nagel's example. Imagine a smart and successful adult gets a brain injury that leaves him thinking like a happy baby. He seems content but unaware of what he's lost. Yet we see this as a big tragedy for him. The harm isn't in how he feels now, but in the loss of his abilities, the closing off of his potential, the end of who he was. Death's like that, only more final. It shuts down all future chances. The deprivation account has its own issues. The toughest is the timing problem, highlighted by Epicurus way back. If death harms by taking away future goods, when exactly does this harm happen? It can't be before death, because you're still alive then. It can't be right at death, because that instant is fleeting. And it can't be after death because you don't exist anymore. So when does death actually make you worse off? Those defending the deprivation account have multiple replies. One is to say that harms don't need to happen at a specific moment. Death is harmful because it makes your life have less good stuff overall than it could have had. It's like comparing two versions of your life, one that actually happened and one that didn't, but could have. Imagine a short novel that doesn't hit the mark. It's not that any part of it is particularly bad, just that it ended too soon. Similarly, a life can feel incomplete when it's cut short. This idea raises questions. Does missing out on future good things due to death mean that being born later is also harmful? If you were born a decade earlier, you'd get 10 extra years with all their experiences. Following this logic, your real birth date robbed you of those years. Yet we usually don't see our birth date as some kind of bad luck. This is what people call the asymmetry problem. Being born late and dying both mean missing out on good things, but death seems to sting more. Philosophers Anthony Bruckner and John Martin Fisher suggest this is because our minds and way of making decisions are wired to focus on future plans and goals, unlike how we view our past. Death cuts these forward-looking plans short, whereas a late birth doesn't seem to spoil anything we've already got going. Critics argue this just explains what we think, not why it's right. Maybe our focus on the future is just an irrational habit to help us survive and reproduce. If that's true, then our worries about future losses don't automatically mean they're worse. The idea of deprivation also falters in cases where death doesn't take away anything good. Consider someone in terrible, terminal pain with no hope of getting better. For them, life only brings harm, and death might even be a relief. It seems whether death is bad depends on what your future could have held, making its badness conditional, not absolute. This has real-world effects, suggesting our reactions to death should fit each situation. Losing a happy child feels tragically unfair due to all the lost potential life, but the death of someone who's suffering at the end of their life might not be tragic at all, perhaps even a relief. This often aligns with what people feel is right, but it does make death seem less universally significant. Another issue is the better alternative problem. Saying death is bad because it steals away good things raises the question, which good things? If you pass away at 70, do we compare that to living to 71, 80, or maybe even 100? Why stop there? Should we be comparing it to living 200 years or forever? If infinite life is our standard, every death looks infinitely bad because it stops you from experiencing endless good. That sounds pretty extreme. Those who support the deprivation view usually respond that the right comparison is to the life you would have actually had if you hadn't died when you did. Like if you die from a heart attack at 70, the comparison is to living maybe to 85. Death may have taken 15 years, not an endless number of years. So the harm is significant, but not limitless. However, this response also shows how figuring out how bad death is requires context. The same death can feel more or less tragic depending on what alternatives we imagine. An elderly person dying too soon at 80 only faces harm if they were otherwise on track for more good years. If they weren't, maybe it didn't shorten their potential much. Death's badness doesn't come from the act itself, but from the complicated counterfactual scenarios we compare it to. An Epicurean might keep pushing. Even if we agree that death takes away things from people, why should this loss matter to the person who dies? Once they're gone, they can't care about what they've missed out on. Picture yourself really into a project that needs another 5 years to finish, then boom, you're gone. The work remains incomplete. But why care about that when you're not around to fret over unfinished business? Your dreams, aims and beliefs disappear along with your consciousness. From a state of non-existence, nothing holds significance. This argument uncovers something vital. The idea that losing something matters requires us to judge the quality of someone's life even after they've died. It treats life's value as something to be measured as a whole, regardless of whether the person's around to evaluate it. And this isn't crazy. We make similar calls about art that maintains its value long after the artist has passed. But it asks us to accept that suffering and gain don't have to be felt to be real. Things get more tangled when we bring up questions of personal identity. Who exactly suffers from death? A 40-year-old who dies isn't the same as the 60-year-old they would have become. Different cells, distinct memories, new personality traits. In what way does death harm the 60-year-old who never comes to be? Maybe death harms not a person but a life path. Yet life paths are abstract, and not the kind of thing we can see as harmed or benefited in a moral sense. These philosophical riddles might seem far removed from real-life issues, but they have real-world impacts. In medical ethics, whether death harms the patient influences choices about life support, euthanasia, and how to allocate resources. In legal matters, wrongful death suits depend on death being a harm that deserves compensation. In psychology, deciding if we should see death as an adversary to beat or a normal life process partly hinges on if death truly is bad for those who die. What the harm thesis debate shows is this: even the simplest assumptions about death aren't easily untangled. The belief that death is negative for the deceased seems obvious until you try to pinpoint exactly how, when, and why. The Epicurean challenge forces us to clarify our understanding of harm, value, and well-being. The deprivation theory offers a complex answer, but creates more questions about time, identity, and hypotheticals. Most importantly, this debate shows that value and harm aren't merely about subjective feelings. The deprivation theory claims it's objectively true that a life cut short is worse for the person, even if they never experience that negativity. This implies a concept of human flourishing that goes beyond just feeling good in the moment. It suggests that what counts is not only how life seems from within, but how it unfolds as a whole compared to what it might have been. The discussion continues, evolving with each new generation of philosophers who bring fresh ideas to the enduring question. We haven't reached a consensus because the issue touches on something deeply essential about human worth and meaning. What we believe about the harm of death shapes how we plan our lives, the risks we take, the sacrifices we make, and how we support the dying and the grieving. These philosophical discussions are crucial because they tackle what truly matters in life. Part 2. Being toward death, Heidegger and existential authenticity. Martin Heidegger didn't treat death as something simply biological to be examined from the outside. Instead, he saw it as a core aspect of human life that fundamentally shapes who we are. His work in Being and Time stands as one of the most crucial and challenging philosophies about mortality from the 20th century. While thinkers like Epicurus questioned whether death harms us, and Nagel saw it as taking something away, Heidegger was interested in how realizing our mortality is woven into the foundation of human existence. Heidegger used the term Dasein, which means being there in German, to refer to human existence. What sets Dasein apart from other beings is that its existence matters to it. A rock just exists. A tree lives as its nature dictates, but humans have to decide how they exist. We can't escape making choices about our lives, and this necessity shapes what it means to be human. Central to Heidegger's ideas is the notion of being toward death. This doesn't mean constantly thinking about death or being fixated on it. Rather, it's about understanding death as a fundamental part of how we live over time. From the moment we are born, death is a possibility. It's not just a distant end we slowly approach. Instead, our lives are always touched by its presence. Heidegger referred to this as eminent imminence, meaning death is both certain and uncertain in timing. Imagine a fruit ripening. It doesn't just suddenly ripen at life's end. It's continuously doing so throughout its life. In the same way, dying doesn't only happen at life's end. It's something we engage in throughout our existence. We are beings toward death, always progressing toward our ultimate potential. This might sound like playing with words, but it's a profound insight from Heidegger. Our mortality isn't just an outside fact. It's key to how we live. Every project we start, every bond we make, every decision we take is framed by our finite nature. Death forms the boundary that shapes our lives. Heidegger also draws a line between living authentically versus inauthentically. Most of the time we go through life inauthentically, losing ourselves in what he termed the they, the impersonal mass of social norms, expectations and roles. The they guides us on how to dress, what to care about, what to fear, and how to live. We get swept up in daily distractions, split across different roles and identities, be we students, workers, parents or citizens, and forget that above all, we're finite beings destined to end. The they has its own way of handling death. When someone dies, we might say things like people die, or death happens. Acknowledging death, we still keep it at arm's length. Yes, people perish, but not us, not now. Death becomes something that happens to others, a public occurrence to be dealt with through social rites, but never truly faced. This avoidance is what Heidegger called fleeing in the face of death. We understand we'll die eventually, but fail to grasp the truth of our mortality, numbing ourselves with busy work, entertainment and social expectations. We pretend we have loads of time, believing death is real but far off, always happening to others first. Living authentically means having a different relationship with death. It involves what Heidegger calls anticipation, or running ahead toward death. This doesn't mean dwelling darkly on dying, but instead accepting that you will die and that this is a personal journey no one else can take for you. Your death is yours alone, and it's an experience faced in total solitude. When you truly anticipate your own death, something significant occurs. You get that life is short, that time isn't limitless, and that your options aren't endless. This brings about a mood Heidegger calls anxiety, which isn't just fear. Fear has a clear target, like catching a big illness or being in an accident. Anxiety, on the other hand, doesn't have a particular focus. During these anxious times, everything that was once normal feels odd, and the reality you knew feels shaky. Although anxiety is uncomfortable, and we often try to avoid it, Heidegger thinks it's incredibly revealing. When you're in this state of anxiety, all the usual roles and identities you've picked up from society drop away. You're left face to face with your life, a finite one that you must claim as your own without any guaranteed justification or meaning, and with the burden of deciding who to be. It may sound frightening, and in some ways it really is, but Heidegger sees a chance for freedom here, understanding that life is limited and realizing the responsibility of self-creation. Points out that you're free to make your own choices. The usual social norms no longer bind you. You can truly own your life, making choices aligned with your true self rather than going along with what society expects. Heidegger named this concept of ownership and acceptance of mortality as resoluteness. You deliberately decide to be true to who you are, embracing life's limited nature and being accountable for your choices. This doesn't require a fixed life plan, but instead a clarity about who you are and what's important to you, not clouded by the comforting illusion of permanence. Think about how this applies in real life. Someone living inauthentically puts off important decisions, always assuming there's time later. They sacrifice deep commitments for social approval, believing their real life will start in the future. They dodge tough talks and put off meaningful tasks, living as if time were infinite and their life belonged to everyone but themselves. In contrast, someone authentic understands the urgency that comes with life's finiteness. Not all roads are open. Choosing one means not taking another. There's no time to waste on things or people that don't truly matter to them. Death shapes life and demands that you take it seriously, since your time is limited and only yours to use. But Heidegger's views aren't without issues. Firstly, is his idea of authentic versus inauthentic living just an explanation or a suggestion of how we should live? He claims it's just an analysis, but his words suggest a judgment that authenticity is better. If he's suggesting we should be authentic, Why is that the preferred way? Secondly, critics point out that his view leans towards individualism. The idea of being authentically aware of death makes one solitary, because dying is something you do on your own. This focus on facing mortality alone might suggest that relationships like love, friendship, and community are just distractions, but Heidegger would argue that true relationships come after understanding and embracing your mortality. Yet some people aren't buying it. They think the preference for individual existence over connection distorts what it means to be human. Lastly, there's something odd about Heidegger's idea of anxiety. He talks about anxiety as showing us how there's no solid ground in life, no ultimate reason behind our actions and values. When we're anxious, we're faced with the simple reality that we exist without knowing why or for what. Despite that, Heidegger suggests that living authentically means boldly choosing your options. But if life truly has no foundation, and there's no objective way to choose, how can any decision be more authentic than another? Doesn't the revelation of life's meaninglessness throw authentic commitment into doubt? Some feminist and social critics argue that Heidegger's views come from a distinctly masculine, Western, and privileged angle. The freedom to decide how you'll live assumes you have social and material resources that many people do not. Those fighting just to get by, dealing with systemic oppression, or caring for others might find the concept of self-creation an unattainable luxury. Heidegger's idea of design seems to describe an abstract person, detached from real social contexts and caring relationships. Then there's the question of whether Heidegger's perspective really holds up psychologically. Is fear of death really as central as he claims it is? Could it be more about his personal concerns than a universal human experience? Research shows that most people are always worried about existential death anxiety and are quite content wrapped up in their day-to-day lives. Is staying focused on everyday matters really a sign of escaping into inauthenticity, or could it be a reflection of a healthy outlook? Yet despite its critics, Heidegger's views have huge influence. He doesn't see death just as a biological fact or loss, but as a key part of what gives life meaning. The idea that we're beings headed toward death, that our finite nature is at our core, has had a big impact on philosophy, psychology, theology, and literature. Heidegger pushes us to ponder, what does it actually mean to fully accept our mortality? While most of us accept the idea that we'll die, we rarely live as though we truly believe it. We delay, adjust, and wander aimlessly. Heidegger calls us to live our lives deeply aware of our limitations, allowing this to affect our choices and values. The existential therapy movement, inspired by Heidegger's work, brings these ideas into therapy sessions. These therapists help clients face their fear of death, not to get rid of it, but to use it to inspire authentic living. Clients might realize they've been sticking to others' expectations or putting off what they truly want, thinking they have all the time in the world. They might have ignored hard truths to stay comfortable. For these clients, accepting the reality of their finite existence can motivate them to make changes. Death becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. Still, we have to be cautious not to glamorize death or obsess over anxiety. Not everyone becomes their truest self through death awareness. Some freeze, seeing death as making everything pointless, so they struggle to commit to anything. Others may act recklessly, dropping responsibilities under the guise of living authentically. Some put on a show of being unique, yet still conform deeply to societal norms. Heidegger doesn't offer much in terms of practical advice for living authentically. His guidance is broad and abstract. He tells us to face death, decide firmly, and own our lives, but he doesn't spell out what to choose or the best way to live. He thinks authenticity can't be dictated, and each person must find it themselves. This leaves his philosophy open to misuse by any belief, system or lifestyle claiming to buck the trend. More concerningly, Heidegger's own history sparks questions about what he preached versus how he lived. He joined the Nazi Party in 1933 and led Freiburg University during that time. His later attempts to justify or explain this part of his life fell short. Knowing about Heidegger's personal life doesn't automatically discredit his philosophical ideas, but it does mean we might question if truly facing death means you'll act morally. You can fully accept the reality of your death and still make some terrible decisions. Maybe the biggest flaw in Heidegger's take is this: by making death such a big part of being human, isn't there a risk he's making life just about getting ready to die? There seems to be something a bit gloomy about a philosophy that bases human existence largely around the idea of non-existence. Sure, we're going to die, and that's important, but aren't we so much more than that, able to love, create, feel joy and marvel at the world? Doesn't focusing too much on death overshadow these other wonderful aspects of being human? Some existentialists after him tried to mix Heidegger's focus on death with a love for life's more positive experiences. Albert Camus, for instance, suggested we should fight back against our eventual demise by savouring life's beauty, absurd as it is. Simone de Beauvoir highlighted the complex nature of human life, marked by limitations and a unique ability to transcend them through our goals and connections. Emmanuel Levinas went further, critiquing Heidegger's viewpoint entirely by proposing that ethics and our dealings with others are more basic than any contemplation of death. What's worthwhile in Heidegger's viewpoint is seeing death not just as an eventuality, but as something that actually shapes our whole lives. How we handle being mortal influences the decisions we make, the bonds we form, the risks we take, and the meanings we discover. Regardless of whether we buy into Heidegger's full theory, he is spot on about one thing. We live within a time bounded by birth and death, and this time frame is huge in defining who we are. So what Heidegger challenges us with is this urgent, down-to-earth question: how should we live knowing we're mortal? Should we keep death constantly in our sights, or does that take us to a dark place? Should we try to forget about it and just enjoy life, or does that risk us living superficially? Is there perhaps a middle way between always thinking about death and totally ignoring it? These questions lack easy answers, yet Heidegger has made sure we can't dive deep into thinking about human life without grappling with them. Part 3. Terror Management. How we deny death. While Heidegger explored death philosophically, a similar journey began in psychology and anthropology. This research points out that our awareness of mortality affects our behaviour much more deeply and unconsciously than we usually realise. The terror management theory, which evolved from Ernest Becker's work and has been rigorously tested by psychologists over 30 years, paints a grim picture. What we call human culture largely exists to steer us away from contemplating death. Ernest Becker's 1973 book, The Denial of Death, snagged the Pulitzer Prize just 2 months after he succumbed to cancer. The book brings together ideas from Freud, Kierkegaard, Otto Rank, and others into a broad theory about what motivates humans. Becker's main argument is a bold one. Our fear of death drives much of what we do. Most of our actions, both on our own and with others, serve to deny, lessen, or symbolically beat our mortality. Becker noted that humans hold a unique and uneasy place in nature. We're living beings, subject to decay and death like other creatures, but unlike them we have symbolic consciousness. We can think abstractly, imagine futures and introspect. This combo leads to an existential dilemma. We have a strong biological instinct to survive, but we also recognise we're going to die someday. Becker put it provocatively: we're like gods with anuses, creatures able to ponder infinity, but stuck in bodies that will eventually stop working. This realisation creates what Becker termed the terror of death. It's not just fear, but a terror, a deep, potentially crippling anxiety at the core of our existence. Thinking about not existing, the world moving on without us and everything just ending stirs up deep dread. If we were to face this terror head on all the time, we'd be paralysed, unable to function. But somehow, we do manage to function. We rise each morning, work, form bonds and chase dreams. How does this happen? When we're constantly aware of our mortality, Becker had an answer. We build complex psychological and cultural defences that help us deny or downplay death's role. We don't make these defences consciously. They're mostly unconscious, moulding our actions without us noticing. Becker saw culture as our most vital defence mechanism. Every society creates what Becker called a cultural worldview, a set of shared beliefs that gives life purpose and suggests ways to transcend death. Religious views promise literal immortality with an afterlife, while secular ones offer symbolic immortality through enduring accomplishments, contributions to humanity, or merging with something bigger than ourselves, like our nation, humanity, or advancing knowledge. These worldviews play two key roles. First, they provide a reality that makes life feel meaningful by explaining where we came from, why we're here, what's important, and how we should live. This sense of meaning shields us from the existential terror that might arise if we faced our cosmic insignificance. Second, they set standards for what's valued, giving individuals a way to earn self-esteem by living up to these cultural ideals. Achieving these standards, whether by being a good Christian, a successful business person, a loving parent, or a respected academic, gives a personal sense of worth that fights off death-related anxiety. Becker called personal attempts to find significance within a cultural context heroism projects or immortality projects. These are the endeavours and achievements through which we aim to matter, to stand out, to leave our mark. The specifics differ across cultures. In one place, heroism might mean religious passion and sacrifice. In another, it could mean gathering wealth and power. Yet in another, it's about artistic creation or scientific breakthroughs. But fundamentally, the psychological purpose is the same: to forge a sense of personal worth that outlasts death. This deep dive into human behaviour hints at something disturbing. Many of our highest goals, such as art, science, philosophy, religion, and making societal advances, might actually stem from our fear of death. Our proudest creations sometimes act, in part, as complicated ways to deny the inevitability of death. While Becker didn't claim this was the whole story behind human achievements, he did suggest that avoiding death could be a strong, often hidden motivation. The groundbreaking moment came when social psychologists Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Pyszczynski transformed Becker's thoughts into terror management theory, rigorously testing these ideas. Since the 1980s, they've conducted over 1,000 experiments backing Becker's main concepts impressively. The experiments are straightforward yet insightful. Researchers trigger what's called mortality salience by making people consciously think about their own death, often by having them briefly write about it. Others might write about dental pain instead, to serve as a control group for unpleasant but non-life-threatening scenarios. After a short break allowing these thoughts to sink into the subconscious, researchers evaluate various attitudes and behaviours, yielding eye-opening results. When reminded of mortality, people often cling tighter to their cultural beliefs. For instance, American participants who pondered death showed more patriotic feelings towards America and frowned upon other nations. People with religious beliefs become more devout. There's also a tendency to judge harshly those who stray from cultural norms and to favour those who conform. This phenomenon spans across different cultures, ages and personalities, and doesn't stop there. Thinking about death makes people strive to boost their self-esteem. They care more about how they look, become more materialistic and competitive, rate themselves higher, and favour anyone who applauds them. There's also a stronger interest in romance and procreation, seen as both literal and symbolic ways to achieve a form of immortality. Perhaps most disturbing of all, this enhanced awareness of mortality breeds more prejudice and aggression. It makes people more hostile towards those with different religions, ethnicities, or political beliefs, spurs support for aggressive military acts, and leads to harsher legal punishments. They become more conformist, less open to opposing views, and rally behind charismatic leaders promising safety and reassurance. The theory interprets this as worldview defense. If your cultural beliefs shield you from the fear of death, anyone challenging those beliefs jeopardizes your mental stability. People who diverge in beliefs, values, or lifestyles threaten this balance because their mere existence hints that your perspective might be flawed. If your perspective is indeed flawed, your firewall against death's dread crumbles. Thus, the instinctive answer is to belittle, exclude, or even eliminate those who differ. This has far-reaching effects on understanding human conflicts. Much violence between groups, including religious conflicts, ethnic cleansings, and political persecutions, might stem from unconscious death-related fears. Groups often define themselves against others to heighten their sense of significance and unity. By blaming external enemies, they can channel and relieve their own paralyzing fear of death. The theory also clarifies why people hold on to irrational beliefs, despite evidence to the contrary. If a belief system soothes existential fears by warding off death anxiety, any challenge to that system threatens one's peace of mind. People might ignore or twist evidence to maintain beliefs that safeguard them from fear, impacting everything from religious beliefs to any tightly held perspective like political convictions, scientific views, or cultural identity. Research extends these insights to explain behaviours like consumerism and environmental neglect. The consumer world offers symbols of immortality, promising status, beauty, and an enduring legacy through the things we buy. We sometimes collect stuff to give ourselves a sense of stability when everything else feels temporary. Our environmental problems might stick around because fixing them means accepting we're vulnerable and won't be around forever while nature just keeps going. Terror management theory gives us an insight into why self-esteem matters. Why is self-esteem such a big deal for everyone? Traditional psychology didn't really have an answer. According to terror management theory, self-esteem is feeling like a valuable person within the cultural setting you're part of, and it helps ease our fear of death. Studies show boosting self-esteem lowers anxiety in general, especially anxiety about death itself. But when our self-esteem gets threatened, it brings thoughts of death closer to the surface. That's why we care so much about our status, how we compare to others, and how people see us. For self-esteem, we need others to back up our worth and say we meet cultural norms, that we matter, that our lives mean something. This makes us super sensitive to how people see us and scared of rejection. However, not everyone agrees with terror management theory. Some question the cause and effect. Is it fear of death that makes us cling to culture and self-esteem, or do threats to these things bring on death fears? The theory leans towards the first idea, but most evidence only shows a correlation. Maybe our love of culture and self-esteem originally developed for other reasons, and the death anxiety relief just came with it. The theory also seems to over-focus on death's role in our motivations. People are driven by many things, like sexual attraction, wanting status, curiosity, empathy, and looking for purpose beyond just fearing death. Saying all cultural achievement is about denying death simplifies things too much. Sure, art, science, and love might involve getting past thoughts of death, but they're also about beauty, truth, and connecting with others. Cultures around the world have very different ways of dealing with death. Some accept it instead of denying it. Buddhism talks about meditating on death and impermanence. Stoics think contemplating mortality helps us live better lives. In Mexican culture, they celebrate death during the Day of the Dead. These practices don't just deny death, but actually face it head-on. Terror management theory has trouble fitting in these cultural differences about death. Also, the theory raises some political questions. If thinking about death makes people more prejudiced, authoritarian, or aggressive, should we avoid reflecting on it? Should we keep people distracted to stop them from becoming violent? That doesn't sound very realistic or ethical. Plus, some studies say thinking about death can actually make people more compassionate and kind rather than defensive. Another issue is the lab experiments for terror management might not show how awareness of death impacts real life. Writing about your own death for a few minutes in a lab is strange, and doesn't match how death thoughts naturally pop up in daily life. Does it really represent how subtly death influences our everyday actions, or does it just create an overwhelming anxiety that leads to unusual behaviours? Supporters of the theory counter these criticisms by noting decades of research across various methods and cultures support the theory's ideas. They agree that death anxiety isn't the only thing that drives us, but argue it's more widespread and impactful than we realise. They also differentiate between consciously thinking about death, which can be positive, and unconscious fears of death, which can lead to defensive and harmful actions. The theory also evolved to explain the differences between how we deal with death when it's right in front of us, versus when it's more of a background thought. When death is on our minds, we tend to take logical actions like getting medical help or avoiding risks. Distal defences kick in when thoughts of death linger, in the background, unseen, and in such moments, folks tend to cling to symbolic protection through things like embracing their culture or boosting their self-esteem. How someone reacts is predicted to change depending on whether they're consciously thinking about death or those thoughts are bubbling under the surface. The latest studies are digging into whether there's a brighter side to how we handle the fear of death. Can knowing we're mortal inspire growth, compassion, and wisdom instead of just making us defensive or aggressive? Some research points to a yes. If you think about death in specific ways, especially when feeling a connection to nature or a sense of transcendence, you might feel more grateful, generous, and worry more about the future. The trick is to foster situations where knowing about one's mortality leads to growth-based reactions, rather than just trying to prove oneself. The theory's biggest insight might be that a huge part of what makes us tick comes from anxiety, more than we usually admit. Freud talked about how our desires are often hidden deep down. Terror management theory puts the spotlight on our hidden fears. People aren't usually making choices based on careful thinking about what they truly value. Instead, our actions often aim to calm the deep-seated fear of death. This has big implications for how we see ourselves and others. Someone loudly defending their political opinions might not be basing that on facts, but rather shielding themselves from anxiety. When a culture treats outsiders harshly, it might not be about real threats, but a symbolic stand against mortality. And when someone chases status, it could be less about genuine passion and more about finding some meaning in the face of life's end. If terror management theory is on point, then a lot of what seems logical or noble in human behaviour actually has its roots in dodging thoughts of death. This idea doesn't have to be completely negative or narrow. Denying death can push people to win real achievements. Cultural beliefs that help people cope with death worries can also encourage working together, creativity, and thriving. Seeking self-esteem might lead to striving for excellence. Problems crop up when denying death leads to bad outcomes like prejudice, violence, hurting the environment, or ignoring evidence. The theory hints that if we realise how thoughts of death steer us, we might make wiser choices. If you know your harsh opinions of others partly come from anxiety about death rather than a pure moral stance, you might judge less harshly. if you realise your non-stop busyness is partly a way to dodge big existential questions, you might slow down and rethink what's important. If you see that some beliefs help calm anxiety more than tell the truth, you might hold on to those beliefs a bit less tightly. Can we actually bring these hidden processes to the forefront of our minds? Researchers say it's tricky because death denial works under the radar to shield us. Becoming conscious of these thoughts might weaken that shield. This creates a bit of a catch-22. As you get more aware of how fear of death influences you, you might need to find new ways to handle it. Some experts believe the goal isn't to do away with fear of death. It might not be possible anyway, but to deal with it healthily. Instead of outright denying or fighting against death, we could aim for what's called mature death acceptance. This means facing mortality head-on, while finding meaning that doesn't rely on clinging to a worldview or putting others down. Mature acceptance might take cues from philosophies like Stoicism or Buddhism, which focus on accepting that things don't last forever. It could mean finding meaning in living now rather than in leaving a legacy, getting fulfillment from helping others more than chasing personal goals, and viewing cultural beliefs as human-made stories instead of absolute facts. Research on what are known as positive ways of thinking about death suggests it's possible to benefit from contemplating mortality. When folks take time to reflect on death in a structured setting that focuses on gratitude, connections with others, or self-transcendence, they often become more generous, feel more satisfied with life, and experience psychological growth. What's crucial is seeing awareness of death not as a threat, but as encouragement to live more fully and with kindness. Terror management theory gives a bit of a harsh view of human nature. We aren't as rational, noble, or consciously driven as we like to think. Much of what we do is about unconscious defences. Some of our greatest cultural achievements and most horrible actions both partly stem from the fear of death and our desperate need to overcome it. This doesn't make us despicable, but it does make us susceptible to being manipulated and likely to act destructively when we're worried about death. Understanding terror management helps us realise when our actions are influenced by anxiety about death, and when leaders or movements use that anxiety for political reasons. Fear tactics partly work by stirring up death worries, making people more defensive and rigid. Noticing this pattern can help us respond more logically to threats that are created. The theory also points out how societal views on death shape entire communities. Cultures that openly acknowledge death and offer healthy rituals for facing our mortality might create people who are less likely to resort to violence and more capable of compassion. On the other hand, cultures that deny death and pretend invincibility may lead to more anxious and aggressive citizens when their beliefs are challenged. Terror management. Theory and Heidegger's existential analysis share the idea that awareness of death deeply influences human lives. Where they diverge is in their focus. Heidegger believed that facing death honestly could be freeing and make individuals more unique, while terror management theory sees death awareness as causing anxiety that encourages conformity and defending worldviews. Perhaps both perspectives are correct. Death awareness can either liberate or frighten us, depending on whether we engage with it consciously and reflectively, or unconsciously and defensively. Part 4. The Symmetry Dilemma. Why we dread death, but not our time before birth. A long-standing mystery in the philosophy of death is why we feel time's imbalance. We view death as negative, even tragic, particularly when it happens too soon. Yet we don't see being born late as similarly unlucky. This imbalance seems illogical. Both death and late birth steal life from us. If you'd arrived 10 years earlier, you'd have gained 10 extra years of life. If you lived 10 more years than planned, you'd also have 10 extra years. Why are we bothered by one loss but not the other? This puzzler traces back to Lucretius, a Roman poet and Epicurus enthusiast. Critias claimed that if death troubles us because it robs future life, we should be equally troubled that we weren't born sooner, thus robbing past life. He pointed out that the time before our birth mirrors the time after our death in both cases. We don't exist. If infinity before birth doesn't bother us, eternity after death shouldn't either. The argument has a neat logical shape. Let's think about Alice and Betty. Alice is born in 2000, dying in 2025 at 25. Betty, born in 1990, dies in 2040 at 50. Betty lives 25 years more than Alice. This situation can be described in two ways. First, Betty lives longer after birth and gets 25 extra years of life. Second, Alice is born 25 years later than Betty and misses out on 25 years before death. Both highlight the same fact. Betty has more years of life than Alice, but our emotional reactions vary. We see Betty as luckier than Alice, because Betty lives to 50 while Alice only reaches 25. We feel Alice's death at 25 is tragic, but we don't find Alice's later birth in 2000 instead of 1990 to be unfortunate compared to Betty. We don't think Alice's birth date is tragic, yet both situations involve a loss of 25 years, or picture one person passing away at 70. Imagine two alternate realities. In one they live to 80, gaining 10 extra years at life's conclusion. In the other they are born 10 years earlier, gaining 10 more years at life's start. Both scenarios involve 80 years instead of 70, but we care much more about living longer than being born earlier. This imbalance challenges the idea that death is bad due to lost opportunities. If death is bad because it robs us of good times we could have had, then being born late should be bad for the same reason. Both limit our lifespan compared to what could have been, yet we care deeply about one situation and hardly at all about the other. This implies our worry about death isn't just about what's lost, but about something else that doesn't align with the strategy of loss. Philosophers have come up with different ideas to explain this asymmetry. One approach is to reject the imbalance and say a late birth truly is unlucky. Fred Feldman takes this view, arguing that if being born earlier would have meant a better life, then your actual birth timing does deprive you and is somewhat bad for you. It's just that you don't dwell on this loss, because you don't have desires or regrets about not existing earlier. This response keeps the logic of the loss idea intact, but feels counterintuitive to most. It suggests that everyone suffers one of the greatest misfortunes possible. We all could have had more life if born earlier. Every person is shortchanged of infinite potential, past life. This seems to make the notion of misfortune trivial. If everyone faces the greatest deprivation, the idea loses its real-world impact. A more accepted view highlights how our future gets our attention in ways that potential past doesn't. We make plans, set goals, build relationships and develop skills, all with our future in mind. But death throws a wrench into these future-oriented efforts. It stops unfinished projects, evolving relationships and unrealized plans in their tracks. Being born late doesn't mess with any backward-looking thoughts because we don't plan for times when we didn't exist. Philosophers Anthony Bruckner and John Martin Fisher have tackled this idea thoroughly. They suggest we care more about future rewards than past ones we could have had, and this isn't unreasonable. It aligns with how we think and act. We can shape our future, not our past. Our emotional investment is in what's next, not in what might have been before we existed. Death threatens what we're invested in, namely, our future, while being born late doesn't threaten what we care about. Critics argue this is just describing our state of mind without really explaining it. Maybe our focus on the future is baseless or random. Does when a deprivation happens really determine its harm to us? If losing something good makes death bad, the timing shouldn't matter. Just because we care more about future loss than past loss doesn't mean future loss is actually worse. Derek Parfit famously argued that being biased toward the future doesn't make sense. Imagine you're in a hospital. The doctor states either you had a painful hour-long surgery yesterday with no anaesthetic, but won't remember it due to a drug, or you're set for a much shorter, less painful surgery tomorrow with partial anaesthetic. What would you prefer happened? Many feel strongly that the painful surgery should be in the past, even though it means more pain happened. This shows we might care more about less actual harm in the future than more harm in the past. Yet maybe this bias isn't out of line. Time's flow might matter profoundly. Some philosophers think the future is open with new possibilities, unlike the past. The past is set, while the future holds potential. In that case, death cuts off real possibilities, whereas being born late doesn't rob you of what's genuinely possible. This idea, though, depends on controversial views about time and possibility that not all philosophers agree with. Another perspective looks at prenatal and posthumous non-existence differently. Before you exist, there's no you to miss out on anything. But once you arrive, you can gain and lose things. Death takes potential future benefits away from someone already here. Being born late doesn't take past goods away, because there was no you to lose before birth. Critics point out that in death there's no one left to experience loss either. When you die, you're gone. There's no longer a you to miss out. So why does this asymmetry remain? If death can harm you after you no longer exist, it seems logical that being born late could harm you before you existed. Maybe the issue isn't just about existence, but identity across time. Once you exist, it's clear who you are and the life you could have had. Death shortens this potential. Before you exist, there's no specific scenario about when you should have arrived earlier. There are countless possible earlier beginnings, none special. So while death steals a defined future, being born late doesn't take away any specific past. This idea makes some sense, but also faces challenges. If we can imagine different times of death, why can't we do the same for different times of birth? Both involve pondering a reality where your life's timeline changes. The underlying situation seems similar. Another angle focuses on life stories. A human life has a natural narrative with a start, middle and an end. Life gets cut short unexpectedly, leaving a lot of unfinished stories, missed opportunities and broken bonds, which feels against what we imagine a life should look like. But being born late doesn't really mess up life's usual flow. Your life still kicks off at some definite point. It simply starts when it does. There's no sense of missing an earlier beginning that would seem like the right start of your tale. This concept highlights an important aspect of how we perceive both time and life's progression, although it might just describe our natural instincts rather than provide any real justification. Why should how a story unfolds be of moral importance? If the main goal is boosting the total amount of well-being in a life, narrative elements might seem irrelevant. The issue of time's asymmetry ties into broader questions about what constitutes personal identity and what truly matters for our continued survival. When we wish to live longer, what is it we're really thinking about? Are we concerned about our future selves' existence? But our future versions will be notably different from our current selves, holding different memories, beliefs, and even having a different physical form. So in what way are they still essentially us? Perhaps it isn't a strict match of identity that counts, but rather a sense of psychological continuity and connection. We're invested in our future because we'll be psychologically linked to that future person through a trail of memories, intentions and traits. This psychological link helps explain our focus on the future and why we don't dwell on a potential extended past. We don't share psychological ties with the past selves we didn't become by being born earlier, but we do have such ties with the future selves we might grow into. Yet this creates even more questions. If psychological continuity is the focus, Shouldn't we be less concerned with our distant future than with our nearer one, since those links tend to fade over time? The person you'll be at 80 will differ quite a bit from who you are now at 30. Nonetheless, we don't equate dying at 80 with dying at 35 as only slightly better. We deem it far more significant to gain those extra 45 years, even if you'll be quite different psychologically. Some philosophers argue that we simply need to accept this asymmetry as a straightforward feature of human psychology. We're beings who naturally prioritize our future over our past. It's not irrational, it's intrinsic to being a creature that plans and lives moving forward. Our orientation toward the future is as basic to us as being rational or social beings. Trying to make sense of it might be like trying to explain why we care more about our well-being compared to others. At some point you hit fundamental facts about human nature that require no further defense. While this stance is honest, it also surrenders too easily. Philosophy strives to clarify the reasons behind our decisions. Just resigning to our greater concern for the future, without delving deeper, means stepping away from the philosophical effort to grasp our underlying values. The problem of time's asymmetry also carries real-world consequences. It shapes how we think about life-extending technologies. If living longer holds value, investing a lot into lengthening human lives might seem worthwhile. But if the importance is simply in the total years spent alive, we might achieve the same effect by having children earlier, resulting in more lived years without needing life extension. This preference indicates that what we truly value is more about continuing a personal journey, preserving projects, and nurturing relationships, rather than just accumulating years. Death's drawback isn't only in reducing total goodness, but in halting an ongoing life. On the other hand, timing one's birth doesn't upset anything because starting life later doesn't interrupt. This time imbalance also influences decisions when approaching the end of life. If people had the option to either die now or live an additional year even with pain, most individuals would choose the extra year, particularly if it means wrapping up affairs or keeping relationships alive. Conversely, if offered the choice between never having existed or being born just to endure one painful year, most would opt for never existing. It seems like future pain holds more weight than past pain when we think about life. The tricky part of this time-related dilemma might never be completely solved because it taps into fundamental parts of how we experience time and make decisions. We're beings who live in the moment, remember what's happened, and plan for what's coming. This way of experiencing time is such a core part of us that it naturally shapes how we judge situations. Even if we can't fully explain this imbalance, it's important to acknowledge it. It highlights that our anxiety about dying isn't just about losing stuff we value in a broad sense. The flow of time plays a key role, and the way we fit into it makes a difference. Death strikes hard not just because it cuts life short, but because it disrupts the timeline of experiences we're living. Lucretius's conundrum keeps challenging the theory that death's harm is simply about loss. Any solid theory about why death isn't good needs to address why we're so focused on the time we die and not as much on our birth. The best explanations draw on insights from human psychology, our way of making decisions, and how we're wired to think about time. But whether these insights are enough to explain or just outline the imbalance is still up for debate. Part 5. The immortality question. Would eternal life really be a good thing? Most folks, when offered a chance to live forever, would jump at the opportunity without a second thought. Death is seen as the foe we need to conquer. If we could find a way to beat it, we'd be solving humanity's biggest headache. But would we really? There's an intriguing philosophical debate that suggests immortality might be worse than dying, that living forever could actually be more of a curse than a blessing. This surprising idea, most notably argued by philosopher Bernard Williams, challenges our deepest beliefs about the value of living and dying. Williams builds his arguments around a story from the opera The Macropoulos Case by Czech composer Leos Janáček. The main character, Elena Macropoulos, drank a life-extending potion at age 42 that kept her from aging. Now, 342 years old, she's anything but happy. She's bored, feeling cold and worn out, with nothing sparking her interest anymore. When given the chance for another dose of the potion, she turns it down, opting for death instead. Williams uses her story to argue that, in the end, immortality would be unbearable. His argument has two parts. First, for life to be worth living, it needs to have goals, projects and desires that motivate you to keep going. Williams calls these desires categorical desires, and they're what give you a reason to live so you can achieve them. Think of things like finishing your book, watching your kids grow up, learning a new language or travelling to Japan. These desires make life in the future feel valuable because achieving them requires you to stick around. Categorical desires can either be one and done, or something you repeat. One and done desires might be things like climbing Mount Everest, writing your life story, or patching things up with a long-lost friend. Repeatable ones are like savouring good food, vibing to music or hanging out with loved ones which you can enjoy multiple times. The catch is, once and done desires run out. After living for 300 years you might find you've done everything you ever dreamed of, maybe even more than once. And Williams says even repeatable desires lose their spark when done endlessly. Imagine your absolute favourite dish. Now think about eating it every single day for a year, then for 10 years, then stretch that out to a century. Slowly, even the tastiest meal would become bland. This applies to every repeatable pleasure, be it sex, talking, art, or nature. These are all great in small doses, but potentially insufferable when they go on forever. Humans have a knack for getting bored. Things that once seemed exciting become routine. What used to feel meaningful turns hollow. The second part of Williams' argument is about personal identity. For eternal life to even be appealing, it has to be you continuing on, not someone else just in your body. But what keeps you the same person over time? It's some mix of your character, memories, values and personality, yet these evolve as time goes on. The future you, 300 years down the line, might hardly resemble who you are now. Everything from your memories, values, personality, or interests may be different. Williams contends that if your character changes enough, the immortal person isn't really you in any significant sense. Your current self, with its specific projects and relationships, essentially passes away, albeit slowly, as you're gradually replaced by someone new. If your character stays unchanged, you end up stuck, unable to grow or evolve. Without change, life feels frozen and pointless, trapping you in an unending present. So you face a tough choice. Either immortality means so much change that your personal identity isn't preserved, so you don't genuinely survive, or there's too little change, so you're mentally stuck. Neither option is truly appealing. From this standpoint, death isn't just tolerable, it's essential. It's the fact that our time is limited that gives life structure, significance, and urgency. On the flip side, philosopher Thomas Nagel argues that death is always a loss, no matter when it arrives, and that with the right understanding, immortality would be desirable. Nagel thinks Williams's perspective is narrow when it comes to what might drive an immortal being. Williams assumes eternal life mirrors our current existence, just with no end in sight. But why should that be the case? An immortal being could develop fresh skills, uncover new joys and take on endlessly complex projects. Look at intellectual pursuits like mathematics and philosophy. They offer infinite exploration. An immortal could dive into these boundless areas without wearing out. Or think about relationships. An immortal could form meaningful bonds with each new generation, each one distinct. Then there's creativity. An eternal artist might spend centuries refining a single masterpiece, reaching levels of perfection mortal artists couldn't dream of. Nagel acknowledges that some benefits are tied to our limited lifespan, like the urgency and passion that come with knowing our time is finite. Yet, he points out that immortality has its perks too. The chance to finish projects without hurry, gain wisdom beyond mortal reach, and witness history's grand sweep over time. These are treasures only immortality can offer. Plus, Nagel suggests we can't be sure eternal life would necessarily be dull. Williams imagines immortality, based on stretching out our current experience, but it's tough to accurately predict infinite existence from our finite one. Possibly creatures meant for immortality wouldn't get bored like we do. After centuries, maybe you'd shift into a psychological state beyond our understanding now. This debate has sparked a wealth of philosophical discussion, exploring various scenarios. Some philosophers differentiate types of immortality. There's just never-ending life. Then there's immortality combined with perpetual youth, perfect health, and endless resources. What if you could choose to end your life at will without being forced to die? What about being immortal in a world where everyone else is too, versus being the sole immortal? The appeal of immortality likely hinges on the specifics. Being a frail, isolated immortal in a universe facing eventual heat death sounds terrible. However, being eternally healthy and surrounded by friends in an ever-fresh infinite universe could be amazing. The core question isn't simply if immortality is appealing, but what type and under what conditions it might be. Some philosophers propose that the real issue isn't immortality versus mortality, but the meaning and value of life. Whether life's duration is limited or boundless, does it have enough meaning and worth to make it livable? A finite life can be incredibly meaningful, and an infinite one can feel hollow, or vice versa. It's not the length of life that decides its value. This links to narrative questions. Finite lives have a story arc, a beginning, middle, and end. This gives life a pattern with development, climax, and resolution. An immortal existence lacks this narrative flow, becoming a series of episodes. Some think this makes immortality meaningless, as it misses the unity of a narrative. Others believe that episodic living can have its own value, and that we overemphasize narrative unity because of our mortal limitations. There are also practical concerns. If we develop technology that could dramatically extend lifespans or achieve immortality, should we use it? Part of the answer hinges on whether a very long life would be desirable. But social and ethical issues also come into play. Universal immortality would lead to huge population and resource challenges. If only some could be immortal, it would lead to extreme inequality, with the wealthy buying eternal life, while the less fortunate face mortality. This seems ethically unacceptable. There's also the risk of social stagnation. New people bring fresh ideas, challenge norms and drive progress. Without death, social change would slow, and those in power might cling to it forever. Societies that value age could become stuck, halting innovation that depends on generational turnover. Mortality makes room for newness and change. Life extension supporters argue that we shouldn't rely on death to tackle social issues. If inequality or stagnation is the problem, then those are the issues that need fixing with better social policies. Letting people die just to make room for others or to create change isn't the solution. Most life extension ideas wouldn't lead to true immortality. They would simply extend healthy lifetimes, like living up to 150 instead of 75. Concerns about endless boredom don't really apply to lives that are just really long, but William's point might still matter for long lives. Living to 300, for example, might mean running out of things you truly desire by that age. His argument isn't about true immortality, just having a life long enough where boredom and a lack of meaning kick in. We don't know exactly where that line is. Would 200 years feel too long? Or 500? Maybe it depends on the person. There's another angle that hasn't been looked at much. How the desire to keep living might shift over a lifetime. In your younger and middle years, when you have lots of goals and relationships, living longer seems appealing. But after reaching old age, once you've met most of your big goals and many close to you have passed on, you might genuinely feel ready to go. Not from sadness, but from feeling complete. You've lived fully, and pressing on might add very little. So maybe the best plan isn't fixed years or immortality, but choice. We could go on living as long as it's meaningful, or choose to die when we're truly ready. Some call this way of thinking conditional immortality, where you can live indefinitely with the option to leave when you wish. You wouldn't be forced to die or live against your choice, but even this idea has its challenges. Choosing death assumes you won't find future life worthwhile, but how can you be sure? Another 100 years might uncover new joys or purposes. By opting for death, you're closing off paths you haven't even imagined yet. The decision could be swayed by things like societal pressure, depression, or a fleeting sense of despair that might go away if you just hung on. The whole discussion about immortality sheds light on what really matters to us in life. Is it about experiences and joys? Then a limitless life could be great, as long as the good times keep rolling. Is it about relationships? Then living forever with loved ones sounds perfect, but doing so solo would be tragic. Is it about achievements and purpose? Then it's only valuable if an endless life offers chances to do something meaningful. Williams's take implies that it's not mere existence we treasure, but one shaped by having an endpoint. The pressures, passions, and meanings created by knowing life ends aren't minor perks we could just transplant into a never-ending life. They're tightly linked to being mortal. A forever being trying to hold on to a human understanding of life might be fooling itself. True immortality would require a whole new way of experiencing existence, possibly better, possibly worse, but definitely different from the life we know. Some philosophers inspired by Buddhism say clinging to life is the root issue. Wanting to live forever is a sign of craving, the root of suffering. Instead of stretching life forever, we should seek peace with life's temporary nature. This view suggests that avoiding death might actually stand in the way of living well right now. Real wisdom is about accepting mortality without fighting it. On the flip side, others using ideas from Nietzsche propose eternal recurrence as a life-affirming test. If you'd gladly live your life again and again in exactly the same way, then it's a well-lived life. This isn't about a theory that time loops, but a way to judge life's value. Would your life remain meaningful if it was the same forever? The back and forth about immortality won't find a neat answer. It all boils down to things we can't factually settle and value, debates that allow for all sorts of viewpoints. We don't really know what endless life would feel like deep down. We can't be sure if inevitable boredom could be beaten. We're unsure whether we'd still recognize ourselves after countless years. Even if we have this information, people have different opinions on what type of life holds the most value. This debate shows that our views on death are complex. We fear death because we cherish life, yet we might need death to give life its worth. This contradiction, that our values relate to our fears, indicates that the link between mortality and meaning is more profound than we often acknowledge. Maybe the meaning we find in life arises not in spite of its end, but because of it. Practically speaking, it teaches us humility regarding extending life. We shouldn't just assume that living longer is better, or that living forever would be ideal, but we also shouldn't accept death as inherently good or necessary without careful thought. The truth likely sits somewhere in the middle. Life is precious, but maybe not endlessly so. Death is unfortunate, but perhaps not the worst fate. The ideal lifespan might be longer than what we currently have, yet not as endless as immortality. Long enough for significant accomplishments, but not so lengthy that life becomes intolerable. Both Williams and Nagel highlight that death presents a real philosophical challenge. Williams suggests mortality is essential for meaning, whereas Nagel views mortality as consistently unfortunate. However, both agree the matter is deeply significant. How we perceive the value of death influences our ideas about the meaning of life, priorities in medicine, how we allocate resources, and what future we strive to create. Whether immortality would be beneficial remains unclear, but pondering this question helps us define what we truly value about life itself. Part 6. Death and meaning. Does mortality give life significance? One of the biggest questions about death is how it relates to life's meaning. Does our inevitable death give significance to our lives, or does it make life meaningless? This question sparks intense debate, with people divided on the issue. Some believe that knowing we have limited time makes everything more important. Others feel that having a finite life actually takes away from the true significance. The debate reflects deep disagreements about what brings meaning to our lives and where it comes from. The finite meaning idea suggests that mortality doesn't just fit with a meaningful life, it actually makes it necessary. Without death, life would lack the urgency, intensity, and order that allow for meaningful actions. Think about deadlines. The word itself hints at death. We rely on deadlines because without them, procrastination could go on forever. The pressure of limited time makes us prioritize, focus, and take action. Get rid of the deadline and motivation disappears. Life itself puts us on a time limit. Our finite time pushes us to use it wisely. If you thought you'd live forever, why bother reading this book today instead of 100 years from now? Why have that tough conversation today instead of putting it off forever? Why rush to achieve any goal when you could have endless time? The limited nature of time gives it value. Every single moment is precious because they are finite. The sense of urgency goes beyond just pressing timelines. It shapes the narrative of our lives. A life that has a beginning, middle, and end creates a dramatic arc. Your choices gain importance because they limit what else you can do. You can't pursue everything, so your decisions reflect your true self. Commitment becomes meaningful because it requires giving something up. Deep love matters because the time you share is limited. If you had unlimited time with endless people, each connection would lose meaning. Philosopher Samuel Scheffler points out that mortality adds meaning to life by linking us to future generations. We care about leaving a legacy, about projects that last beyond our own lives. We invest in our kids, create enduring art, and build lasting institutions. These future-focused endeavours are meaningful exactly because we won't be around to see them fully realised. We contribute to a future we won't experience. This kind of selfless generosity is only possible when we know we're mortal. On top of that, facing the reality of death raises the stakes for our lives. Our choices become significant because they shape our only life. There's no redo, no second chance to choose differently. This unchangeable nature gives our choices weight. A wrong career move can waste non-recoverable years. A damaged relationship might remain broken because life doesn't guarantee time to fix it. This high-stakes reality gives life a seriousness it wouldn't have if everything could be undone or retried. Death also opens the door to tragedy. Tragedy plays a key role in human meaning-making. The potential for good lives to be tragically cut short, for dreams to go unfulfilled, and for relationships to end because of death provides life with poignancy and depth. A world without tragedy would lack real stakes, genuine loss, and the courage that comes with confronting hardship and mortality. But there's another side to the argument. Some say mortality actually strips life of meaning. This perspective has ancient roots. If everything ultimately ends in death, if our achievements are doomed to be forgotten, if the universe eventually hits heat death and none of our actions leave a permanent mark, then what really matters? In the grand scheme, our efforts seem futile. We build castles in the sand, only to have the tide sweep them away. This stance comes with varying nuances. The most powerful version insists on the need for permanence to find real value, but death ensures that nothing truly lasts. You will pass away. Everyone you love will eventually pass away. Humanity could go extinct. The sun will die out. The universe will cool down to maximum entropy. In the eternal perspective, human life is incredibly brief, and our achievements are fleetingly insignificant. How can anything truly matter in the face of this cosmic pointlessness? Sometimes this is called the futility argument. No matter what you achieve, death makes everything seem pointless. You write an amazing book, but eventually all the copies will fade and it will be forgotten. You love your kids, yet one day they will pass away too, and your family line will end. You contribute to human understanding, but eventually humanity might forget, or it might disappear altogether. All human endeavours share one common fate, being forgotten. The usual response to this idea talks about the difference between objective and subjective meanings. Objective meaning is something intrinsic to the universe. It's like the universe itself thinks it's important. Subjective meaning, however, is the significance we create in our lives through our projects and values. The argument about life's futility suggests that only objective meaning truly matters, but maybe this view is flawed. Things can be important to us, even if they are not on a cosmic scale. Your relationship with your kid is deeply meaningful to both of you, even if it doesn't register with far-off galaxies. What you do matters if it aligns with your personal goals, even if those goals are forgotten later on. Meaning doesn't have to be everlasting or universally significant. It simply needs to involve engaging with activities and relationships that are valuable while we're alive. Still, this way of thinking risks being labelled as subjective. If meaning is something we just care about individually, it becomes random. Serial killers might care about murder, but does that obsession really make it meaningful to them? If meaning is solely about what we care about, then anything could be meaningful, stripping the concept of any real substance. We want to believe some lives are more meaningful than others, that some activities are truly valuable while others aren't. Perhaps genuine meaning involves engaging with activities that have intrinsic value, like creating art, gaining knowledge, connecting with others, or alleviating suffering. These actions hold worth whether or not someone appreciates them. Living a meaningful life means dedicating ourselves to truly valuable endeavours. Mortality doesn't undermine this because things hold value during our engagement with them, despite what follows. Yet arguing for objective value can be challenging. Where exactly do objective values originate from? For secular thinkers, they don't come from God. For nature, it's indifferent to values. Maybe they stem from human nature or rational thinking, but these foundations are debated. Without a solid basis for objective value, relying on, it doesn't necessarily solve the issue. An alternative perspective questions why things need to last forever to be genuinely significant. Imagine enjoying a delicious meal that's gone once you've eaten it. Does its temporary nature make the pleasure meaningless? You have a great conversation that eventually wraps up. The fact it ends shouldn't erase its value. Present joys don't need future permanence. Something can be deeply meaningful to us right now, even if it doesn't last eternally. This realization exposes a flaw in the argument about life's futility, which evaluates life's significance from a timeless angle. But meaning is felt in the present by people who exist in time. Inside our worldly experience, things matter, and whether they matter from a forever standpoint doesn't matter, because we don't live in a timeless realm. Thomas Nagel highlights how life feels absurd because of the clash between our limited understanding and our ability to see that limit. We care intensely about things we ultimately know are not that important. We chase dreams aware that death might make them seem pointless. This contradiction breeds absurdity. We can't help caring about what deep down we know doesn't matter that much. Nagel proposes that instead of despair, a degree of irony is the answer. We should dive into our projects while remembering their cosmic triviality. Balancing both perspectives lets us live earnestly without becoming too serious, so setbacks don't crush us. But critics argue this approach can be emotionally unstable. Can you really dedicate yourself to something if you think it doesn't really matter? Doesn't the idea that nothing truly matters undermine true commitment? Maybe Nagel's approach works in theory, but not in practice. Most folks can't juggle the two perspectives he suggests. They either lose themselves in their endeavours, ignoring the pointlessness, or get stuck realising it's all futile. Another way to look at it is to appreciate the present moment instead of worrying about the long-term story or legacy. What if meaning isn't found in huge projects or lasting achievements, but in what's happening right now? A sunset's beauty is in the now. A real connection with someone carries meaning this very moment. The experience you're having right now is what matters, no matter what happened before or what will happen next. This way of thinking, influenced by Buddhism, argues we miss the point when we chase lasting achievements or worry about the future. True meaning comes from being present, staying aware, and having quality experiences. Death doesn't change this because each moment is meaningful on its own. Whether you live one day or 1,000,000 years, what counts is the quality of your current experiences. This approach is appealing but also has its limits. It doesn't fully explain why we're drawn to goals, projects and relationships that last over time. If only the present matters, why bother finishing that book you're writing? The experience of writing those later chapters isn't any more fulfilling than stopping right now. Yet we do care about wrapping things up, finishing projects, and keeping commitments through time. Just focusing on the present seems to overlook an important part of how people find meaning. Maybe meaning needs both the present and future perspective. A meaningful life mixes the quality of each moment with the pursuit of important goals over time. Death threatens the second aspect but not the first, so mortality partly undermines meaning by interfering with the completion of long-term goals, but doesn't wipe out meaning because being present still holds value. Some philosophers say you find meaning in connecting to something bigger than yourself. Real meaning comes from contributing to something beyond your own existence, whether it's for your community, humanity, God, or some concept like truth or beauty. According to this view, a purely self-focused life lacks meaning, no matter how enjoyable it is. You need to connect with something external to find significance, but mortality complicates things. If you do contribute to something bigger, maybe your contributions will outlast you. The institutions you help build, the discoveries you make, and the people you influence might continue after you're gone. In this way, death doesn't undercut meaning. Instead, it offers a form of transcendence. You live on through the changes you've made in the world. However, this assumes your impact will really endure. Most people's impacts fade fast. A few generations after you pass, people forget you. Your efforts blend into the endless flow of history without personal recognition. Does being forgotten diminish the meaning of your actions? If meaning depends on enduring impact, and most impacts don't last, does that mean most lives are meaningless? That's a tough pill to swallow. It suggests only those with historical significance, like famous artists, scientists and leaders, achieve meaning. But that doesn't feel right. A parent who lovingly raises kids finds meaning, even if history doesn't remember them. A teacher who inspires students creates meaning, even if that inspiration fades in a few generations. Small acts of kindness and creation seem valuable even without a lasting impact. Maybe the problem lies in focusing on legacy. Meaning is not about whether you're remembered, but about how you live. A life focused on worthwhile pursuits and relationships has meaning, regardless of fame or lasting influence. What matters isn't achieving immortality through legacy, but the quality of your life while you're here. Still, we do seem to care about being remembered and leaving a mark. The idea that we might be completely forgotten bothers many people. Why is that? If living well gives life meaning more than whether people remember us, why are we troubled by the idea of disappearing into oblivion? Maybe it's because we think deep down that meaning needs some kind of permanence, and a life completely forgotten seems to retroactively lose its importance. The connection between death and meaning might actually depend on the time frame. In the short view, knowing life is limited makes us focus intensely and act with urgency. When looking mid-term, the chance of dying before achieving everything we set out to may seem to put meaning at risk, and when thinking long-term, being eventually forgotten might make everything feel meaningless. Viewing different timescales, we reach various conclusions about whether facing our mortal end enhances or erodes life's significance. Cultures and religions throughout history have offered various perspectives on these challenging questions. Religions that believe in God often promise eternal life and cosmic importance from God's eternal viewpoint. Here, your life gains endless value because God appreciates it, making death merely a shift to everlasting existence where meaning endures. This idea is compelling for believers, but rests on often debated religious concepts. On the other hand, existentialists who don't rely on a cosmic purpose argue we need to create our own meaning through intentional choices and dedication. Like Sartre said, we're stuck with the freedom to choose our paths without any ultimate reasons. This brings anxiety, but also genuine accountability, as we can't place blame on divine powers or society for our decisions. The Stoics suggested accepting mortality as a natural part of life, urging us to focus on what we can actually control. While we can't control the timing of our death, we can choose how to live right up until that moment. Meaning comes from pursuing a life of rationality and virtue. To them, death isn't inherently good or bad. It's just a natural occurrence, and fearing it only drains energy that could be better used living a fulfilling life. In contrast, many Eastern philosophies stress that impermanence is a core aspect of reality. Everything comes and passes, and seeking permanence only leads to suffering, whereas embracing change leads to peace. In this viewpoint, death doesn't make life meaningless. Rather, our yearning for permanence keeps us from fully appreciating the transient beauty of life. Modern thinkers like Alasdair MacIntyre have looked into whether a meaningful life needs a continuous narrative. He suggests our lives make sense as ongoing stories, where meaning arises from narrative consistency. Death, he argues, provides the final chapter, allowing life's story to hold together. However, some counter that not all meaningful lives need this narrative flow. A life can be meaningful even if it's a series of disjointed moments or multiple phases, with some people constantly reinventing themselves. Ultimately, whether death diminishes or enhances meaning has no one-size-fits-all answer, because the concept of meaning itself is complex. There are various forms of meaning, be it experiential, narrative, relational, goal-driven, or cosmic. These are affected by mortality in different ways. While death might interrupt a life story or hinder achieving goals, it needn't diminish the richness of personal experiences or relationships. Though it wipes out cosmic permanence, it doesn't invalidate more human-scaled significance. Your sense of death's impact on meaning likely centers around which aspect of meaning you value most. If you view cosmic importance and permanence as essential, mortality is devastating. If immediate experience and relationships hold weight, then the finiteness of life is less alarming. If you prioritize reaching personal milestones, then mortality's impact depends on whether you complete them. Most people probably blend these views, cherishing both the immediate and the lasting, personal connections and a broader significance. This puts us in a pull between the various sources of meaning, each with its own timeline. It might be wise to embrace this inherent complexity rather than seeking a simple answer. Death can definitely mess with our sense of meaning. It stops things from being finished, brings that whole everything has to end vibe, and really puts a cap on our experiences and achievements. But on the flip side, death also stirs up urgency, encourages us to make sacrifices, adds depth to our stories, and makes our choices matter more. Really living well isn't about neatly sorting out these contradictions, it's about balancing them. How death influences meaning is closely tied to ideas about the kind of life that's worth living. Think about it. If you're all about achieving things that last, mortality's the big bad wolf waiting outside your door. But if you're living in the now, it's not as intimidating. And if you're searching for some cosmic importance, death feels like a bigger threat than if you're just after deep connections with people. So, whether death wrecks meaning or not depends on how you see life as meaningful in the first place. Part 7. Philosophical responses. Stoicism, acceptance, and the art of dying. Beyond dissecting whether death harms us or robs life of meaning, philosophy has shared some useful insights on how to approach mortality. These teachings aren't about theoretical knowledge, rather they're focused on changing how we emotionally and practically handle the concept of death. The aim isn't to prove death isn't harmful, but instead to live a good life despite knowing our days are numbered. Stoicism, one of the key ancient philosophical schools, placed a significant emphasis on death within its ethical teachings. The Stoics maintain that fearing death doesn't make sense, and that a proper understanding helps dispel this fear. Their strategy involved metaphysical ideas about death's nature, alongside practical methods to tackle anxiety about it. The Stoics began by separating what we can control from what we can't. Death, being uncontrollable, can't ultimately be avoided, so it's pointless to waste energy fearing or resisting it. Our focus should be on what we can manage, our thoughts, values and reactions to situations. Death isn't inherently good or bad, it's neutral. What counts is how we handle it. Epicurus, a former slave turned Stoic philosopher, advised reflecting daily on mortality. Morning should start with the reminder that everyone, including loved ones, will eventually pass. This isn't morbid, it's realistic. By staying aware of life's fleeting nature, you brace yourself for loss. When death arrives, there's no shock or distress, as acceptance of its inevitability has already been achieved. Marcus Aurelius, both Roman emperor and Stoic thinker, frequently wrote in his private notes about death. He reminded himself of death's naturalness, that many have died before him, and that he is merely another temporary formation that will break apart. This cosmic view aimed to make death feel less personally threatening. No one is special. Death spares no one. Embrace it as part of nature's routine. The Stoics also pointed out that dreading death wastes our present. Seneca observed that we agonize more in our minds than in actual events. Most of our fears about death don't come to pass, as we often imagine frightful scenarios that never occur. Even when death arrives, we won't suffer since we'll cease to exist. The fear is real, but the feared event never unfolds as we envision it. Therefore, fearing death is doubly unreasonable. It creates current distress over something that will result in no distress. Stoic methods for easing death anxiety include negative visualization. Regularly picturing the loss of what you cherish, whether health, loved ones or possessions, serves several purposes. It readies you for loss so the impact isn't shattering, boosts gratitude by highlighting how fragile everything is, and loosens your grip on external factors out of your control. Yet Stoicism isn't without its critiques. Firstly, is it even possible to eliminate the dread of death purely through logical thought? The Stoics felt emotions were guided by judgments. If you understand death's neutrality, fear should vanish. Modern psychology, though, argues that emotions aren't so easily commanded. You might know air travel is statistically safe, but still feel fear during turbulence. Understanding that death is natural doesn't automatically erase fear. Secondly, is getting rid of the fear of death even beneficial? This fear helps us stay cautious, encourages healthy living, and pushes us to avoid risks. Completely ridding it could lead to careless behaviour. Maybe a mild sense of death anxiety is helpful, and only extreme cases are troublesome. Thirdly, the detached nature of Stoicism might dampen life's engagement. If you're always aware of life's impermanence and coming loss, could it not lessen your ability to love fully, invest deeply, and care greatly? Stoics would argue it doesn't. They believe true love coexists with accepting life's fleeting nature. However, some critics feel Stoicism's calmness is just emotional numbness, pretending to be wisdom. Lastly, Stoicism may benefit those in privileged situations facing natural ends more than oppressed individuals facing violence or injustice. When you're a Roman emperor nearing the end of your life, due to illness, it might make sense to see death as a natural thing. But if you're in a different situation, like being a slave about to be executed or a child suffering from a disease that could have been avoided, accepting death might feel like giving up on what's fair. The Stoic idea of embracing death as it comes could sometimes serve as an excuse not to resist avoidable deaths. Yet Stoicism still gives useful advice. Recognizing the difference between what's in our power and what's not is still helpful. Stressing over dying eventually just wastes the time we have now. Some level of acceptance is important for our mental health, and the Stoics are onto something when they suggest we should focus on our reactions to events instead of trying to control everything around us. Buddhism handles death differently, but like Stoicism, it also values acceptance. Buddhist teachings say all things we experience are temporary. Clinging to things as if they were permanent leads to unhappiness. Embracing the temporary nature of everything brings calmness and harmony. Death is not seen as an adversary, it's a mentor, showing us that everything that exists is only here for a while. In Buddhism, contemplating death and decay is part of the practice. Some monks even meditate in places where bodies are left to decompose, facing mortality directly. The aim isn't to become obsessed with death, but to see past the illusion of permanence. Our bodies are constantly dying in small ways. Our cells die and get replaced all the time. The line between life and death is more of a blur than a clear boundary. This meditation practice wants to lessen our sense of self. Buddhism says the self is something we cling to, which leads to our suffering. But if you look closely, you'll notice there's no unchanging self, just a flow of experiences and thoughts passing by. Death is simply where this flow ceases. There was never an eternal self to begin with, and realizing this can set us free from being scared of dying. Buddhism also shares the idea that death isn't life's opposite, but rather the opposite of being born. Life involves both birth and death as parts of its cycle. Fearing death but not birth shows a misconception. Each is just a shift, a temporary state that comes and goes. Some Buddhist groups believe in rebirth, though not in the sense of an unchanging soul. Instead, consciousness continues in a new form. For others, rebirth is more about how we change with each new moment, each thought rising and fading. Buddhism's view offers mental health benefits. Studies suggest that Buddhists tend to have less anxiety about death and are more at ease with mortality. Their practices seem to lower existential dread. The philosophy helps make sense of death, easing its fear. Still, Buddhism has hurdles. First off, is denying the self-good for our psyche. Western ways often focus on building self-esteem and a strong identity. Buddhism's idea of the self being an illusion that needs transcending appears to clash with this. Maybe the Buddhist idea works well in their cultures, but could cause issues in societies that prize individuality. Secondly, does accepting death as it is make people passive? If death is just normal and bound to happen, why fight illnesses? Why invent medicines that save lives? Why not just accept death whenever it arrives? Buddhism suggests that even if death can't be avoided, working to ease suffering is a noble pursuit. But focusing too much on acceptance might lead to a kind of fatalism. Also, the concept of rebirth in Buddhism is debated. If taken literally, it requires belief in a philosophical idea that many might find hard to swallow. If seen only as a psychological concept, it might lose its comforting power. The question is whether these Buddhist methods can be effective without buying into Buddhist beliefs. Despite these challenges, Buddhist techniques still offer ways to cope with fear of death. Mindfulness meditation helps reduce the cycle of worrying about dying in the future. Practicing kindness towards yourself and others builds stronger connections, which can lessen the loneliness of facing death. Thinking about how things constantly change can help you enjoy every moment more. These practices are adaptable, even for non-Buddhists looking for better ways to handle the idea of mortality. Then there's the Epicurean philosophy, which provides another angle. Earlier, we mentioned how Epicurus believed death couldn't harm us because we're not around to feel it. But he took it a step further, crafting a whole philosophy to live without fear of dying. His aim was achieving ataraxia, inner peace and undisturbed calm. According to Epicurus, we should enjoy simple pleasures that everyone can access, like friendships, thoughtful reflection, and uncomplicated meals. Seeking more extravagant pleasures only leads to dependence and worry. You fret over losing what you've gained and constantly crave more. This leads to unhappiness. On the other hand, simpler joys are more reliable, cause less stress, and ultimately bring more satisfaction. Epicurus thought death anxiety arose from incorrect beliefs. By changing these beliefs, the fear could be eliminated. Death means nothing to us. There's no afterlife to dread, and the gods don't punish us. When you grasp these realities, you can live peacefully without fearing death. Epicurus also highlighted that our fear of death is learned and cultural. Kids aren't afraid of dying until culture teaches them to be. Remove the false, culturally induced fears, like religious threats of punishment or supernatural horrors, and our natural lack of fear resurfaces. We come into the world without fear of death, and through philosophical understanding, we can return to that state. Critics argue that Epicurus might be oversimplifying things, suggesting that our fear of death could be hardwired through evolution. It might be that we're biologically programmed to fear death because it helps us survive. Logical arguments alone might not override these instincts. Even though Epicurus might be right that death can't hurt us, pure logic doesn't necessarily change our emotions. However, Epicurean ideas still hold value, as much of our death anxiety is indeed due to fears that philosophy can help tackle. Fears of religious penalties can be dispelled by realizing they have no evidence. Worries about missing future events can be eased by living in the present. Epicurus's approach offers a naturalistic alternative to religious methods for handling mortality. Modern philosophers have explored whether always accepting death is the right approach. Some contend that death is genuinely negative, and pretending otherwise isn't right. Accepting premature, unjust death seems morally wrong. For instance, if a child dies from a preventable illness, it feels more appropriate to react with anger and resolve to stop such tragedies, rather than simply accepting it stoically. Acceptance of death seems fitting only for natural deaths at life's end, not for deaths that could be avoided. This brings up questions in medical ethics. Should doctors advise terminal patients to accept death? Or should they always push for more life? The answer likely varies by situation. When more treatment adds nothing but suffering, acceptance appears reasonable. When effective treatments are an option, fighting for life seems sensible. The key is understanding each unique situation. Palliative care has adopted a realistic approach, acknowledging reality without false hope. Doctors are upfront with patients about prognosis, but provide comfort care. The aim isn't to fight death till the very end, or give up prematurely, but to realistically weigh what's possible, focusing on life quality rather than just its length. The idea of a good death has become a topic in contemporary conversations. Different cultures have different ideals. A good death might mean being at home with family, passing peacefully without pain, maintaining dignity and autonomy, or aligning with nature or divine will. These ideals influence how people approach death and make medical choices. Philosophy can help clarify what makes a death good or bad beyond just timing. How death occurs can make it better or worse. Dying peacefully in sleep isn't the same as dying in agony. Passing with loved ones nearby is different from dying alone. Facing death with acceptance differs from facing it in fear. These aspects matter apart from when death happens. The art of dying, which was practiced in medieval and early modern Europe, involved learning to die well. People studied texts on preparing for death, engaged in imagining their own passing, and made thoughtful preparations. It might sound grim to people today, but it shows an understanding that death is significant enough to need preparation. We spend years gearing up for careers that last a few decades, so why not also get ready for death, which is forever? In modern times, the skill of dying has mostly been lost. Death now feels clinical, hidden, or denied. Many people pass away in hospitals, far from their families, with death often seen as a medical letdown rather than a natural finale. This cultural shift has consequences. Folks find themselves staring death in the face unprepared and scared, lacking frameworks to grasp mortality. Some thinkers suggest bringing back the practice of preparing for death. This doesn't mean being fixated on death, but rather facing it realistically. It could involve making advance directives about your preferred medical care or discussing death and mourning with loved ones. Think about what gives your life meaning and if you're living that way. Consider the legacy you want to leave. These practical steps ease anxiety and improve end-of-life experiences. Another philosophical angle is the link between death and virtue. Many traditions argue that realizing we're mortal fosters virtue. Knowing we're going to die pushes us to live genuinely, treat others kindly, and focus on what's truly important. If you thought you'd live forever, you might keep putting off moral seriousness. But some doubt whether being mortal really promotes virtue. Doesn't the fear of death also lead to selfishness or aggression? Terror management. Theory even suggests that fear of death can spark prejudice and violence. Perhaps how awareness of death influences virtue depends on how we process it. Reflectively accepting death might encourage virtue, while unconscious fears could lead to vice. The idea of memento mori, remembering you must die, endeavours to use the awareness of mortality positively. Medieval monks would keep schools nearby as reminders of death. This wasn't to be morbid, but to inspire spiritual dedication. With limited time, one should waste none. Live each day as if it could be your last, creating urgency and thankfulness. However, if overdone, memento mori might feel overwhelming. For some, frequent reminders of death cause not motivation but paralysis or depression. The practice suits certain personalities and cultural settings, but isn't a one-size-fits-all. Wisdom involves figuring out the right level of death awareness for you. As life progresses, your relationship with mortality might change. Young people need some awareness to avoid recklessness, yet not so much that they forget to plan for the long haul. Middle-aged folks need it to spur them to wrap up key projects before it's too late. The elderly need acceptance of death to approach the end without dread. Our relationship with immortality evolves as life unfolds. Philosophy contributes by offering diverse ways to think about death. Stoicism suggests accepting it through reason and nature, Buddhism through the lens of impermanence, and Epicureanism through tranquility based on logic. Modern approaches blend these ancient views with current psychology and medicine. There's no single method that fits all. Different folks in different situations need varied tools, but these traditions all agree. Death is inevitable, though terror about it isn't. We can't beat death, but we can change how we approach it. Philosophy doesn't solve the problem of death, but transforms our experience of living with it. The aim is to develop the right level of fear, not total fearlessness, acknowledge death realistically, and maintain a balanced awareness without obsession. Part 8. Modern boundaries, prolonging life, digital immortality, and technological advancement. For ages, death was seen as a fact we couldn't change. Philosophy offered ways to accept the inevitable. Now, modern science raises the notion of drastically extending life, or even achieving a form of immortality. This shifts the philosophical debate. We must now ponder not just how to cope with mortality, but whether we should try to overcome it. Life extension research explores various strategies. Some aim to slow aging by understanding cells better. Telomeres, as protective bits at the ends of chromosomes, get shorter each time a cell divides. When too short, cells stop dividing and tissues age. Can we lengthen them to slow down aging? Research suggests it could be possible, although there are risks like higher cancer rates. Other methods focus on getting rid of senescent cells, cells that no longer divide but also don't die. These cells build up over time, releasing harmful substances. Drugs called senolytics can clear these cells out. Early studies in mice show hopeful outcomes. Treated mice live longer and healthier. Human trials are starting. Cutting calories consistently extends the lifespan of lab animals. Rats on a 30% reduced calorie diet live longer. This is due to metabolic shifts that slow aging. However, severe calorie restriction isn't appealing or healthy for humans. Now, research is targeting drugs that replicate these benefits without the hunger pangs. Some researchers take an even bolder approach. Aubrey de Grey views aging as a curable disease. He suggests a method for engineered negligible senescence, keeping the body youthful with regular maintenance to fix wear and tear. This includes removing senescent cells, clearing metabolic waste, replacing lost cells with stem cell therapy, among other things. Critics say de Grey might be overestimating. Aging isn't just one disease, it's a complex web of interconnected problems. Solving one issue can create another. Cancer and aging often have opposing mechanisms. What stops cancer might speed up aging, and vice versa. Completely defeating aging may not be feasible due to biology's built-in trade-offs, but even partial progress would be significant. If we could slow aging enough to extend healthy life to 150 or 200 years, it would change humanity entirely. Many philosophical views on death assume our lives last around 70 to 90 years. What if that lifespan suddenly stretched? Dramatic life extension brings deep ethical dilemmas. First, there's the matter of distributive fairness. Such tech would initially be costly. Only the rich might access it. This could lead to extreme inequality, the rich living for centuries while the poor don't. This feels unjust. Yet if we delay until it's affordable for the masses, we allow death that could have been prevented, which is worse. Second, population and resources. Doubling life length could double the population, even with fewer births. Technology wants population balanced. If people live that long, global resources may be further burdened. Should we limit births to compensate for extended lifespans? Should telling people that can have kids be avoided filling a generational gap? Third, societal stagnation. Over time, individuals accumulate influence, wealth, and societal status. Longer lives might result in entrenched disparities. Power continues without turnover. A societal system thriving on innovation and change might suffer. Critics counter that these are challenges to tackle, not reasons to dismiss life extension entirely. We should aim for life extension alongside fairer access, balanced populations, and innovative social practices. Don't let people die to fix social issues. Resolve the social issues themselves. Moreover, life extension isn't all or nothing. Even modest gains adding healthier years to our lives would be worthwhile. Immortality doesn't need to be reached to gain from aging research. Keeping healthy until the end of life could massively enhance many people's lives, even without pushing how long we can possibly live. The big question is, would living really long be something people want? We chatted about William's theory that eternal life might get dull. But how about living for 200 years? Maybe that's long enough to chase big dreams, but not so long that you'd get bored. There might be an ideal lifespan, longer than what we have now, but not never-ending. Then there's digital immortality. It's a totally different idea. Instead of making our biological lives longer, we could, in theory, upload our brains to computers. Your brain could be scanned down to the smallest detail and turned into a computer simulation that's just like you. Same memories, personality, values. Your physical body might die, but you'd keep going online, maybe forever. But that's got folks thinking, would this digital version really be you? Or is it just a copy while you're still gone? This whole thing is a well-known question in philosophy about what makes you, you. Some people think your actual physical self is what counts. You are your body, and a perfect copy isn't you. If your brain gets scanned and uploaded, the theory goes you're still the one who dies. The upload is like a different person, even if it seems just like you. This ties your existence to your exact body, but that idea isn't without questions. For example, your body is changing all the time. Your cells renew, and most of the atoms in you now weren't there 7 years ago, yet you're still you. So maybe you aren't defined by any one set of atoms. Plus, there are cases where people think a psychological link keeps you the same person, even if your physical body changes. Like if your brain was put into another body, you'd still be yourself. Others say if the upload keeps your mindset intact, then it really is you. It's got your memories and quirks, and from its view, it's always been you. It shouldn't matter that it's in digital form now. The essence is in the pattern, not the biological matter. But this raises new questions too. Picture this. Imagine the upload doesn't destroy the original brain. You get scanned and stay alive. Now there are two yous with your memories and personality. The original and the digital. How can both be you? Who's the real you? It's a bit of a head scratcher. A different fix might be swapping your neurons for artificial ones, bit by bit. Each time you'd still be conscious in yourself. Over time your brain would be artificial, but you'd have stayed you the whole way. This seems to handle identity better, but it's still tricky. When do you stop being the original you? After the first change? After you're over half artificial? These are tough questions with no clear-cut answers. Our sense of self doesn't like strict lines, but switching to an artificial brain seems to need them. Another issue with digital immortality is whether a digital being could actually be conscious. Would a computer simulation really have a mind? Or would it just act like it does without actually experiencing anything? We don't quite understand consciousness enough to say if it could exist on a computer. Some think consciousness needs specific biological factors that can't be mirrored in silicon. Maybe quantum effects in brain microtubules or the brain's unique biochemistry. On the flip side, some believe that consciousness is about how things are organized, not what material they're made of. If you build a digital system that mirrors how the brain works, it'll be conscious. The material it's made from isn't important. It's all about how information gets processed. This idea has backing from functionalist theories of mind, but it's still a hot topic. Even if creating digital consciousness is possible, would living forever digitally be a good thing? Picture the scenario. You're in a computer-generated world, designed by programmers to be either a paradise or a nightmare. Your existence hinges on whoever controls the system running your simulation. They have the power to switch you off, tweak your experiences, or even cause you digital distress. There's no promise of a positive experience in a digital life. Moreover, digital immortality still bumps up against William's argument about boredom. Even if you exist as digital data, you've got endless time ahead. Would this be any better than living forever biologically and eventually getting bored? Maybe a digital setting could spice things up with constant updates and new features, but there might still be inherent limitations. Some transhumanists believe the focus should be on enhancement, not just making life longer. Instead of sticking with being human for a longer time, why not aim to become better than human, post-human? We could boost intelligence with genetic engineering or brain-computer tech, eliminate suffering with mood-regulating gadgets, and push our perception and thinking beyond natural limits. This brings up questions about whether enhanced beings would still be the same people. If your intelligence jumps up tenfold because of artificial boosts, are you still you? Or have you turned into someone else? The same identity struggles come up with the idea of uploading. Plus, enhancement sparks debates about human nature and what it means to be authentic. Is there something innately good about being human in our current state? Or should we welcome changes into something completely new? Enhancement also brings up fairness issues. If some folks get enhanced and others don't, inequality could skyrocket, with enhanced people dominating those who aren't. Maybe everyone should enhance, or no one at all, but forcing enhancement goes against personal freedom. If it's optional, the enhanced will outshine the non-enhanced, basically pushing everyone to enhance or get left behind. Some philosophers support morphological freedom. You should be able to change your body and mind as you like. If someone wants to boost their intelligence or upload themselves to a digital form, they shouldn't be stopped. It's their body, their choice. But having no limits on morphological freedom poses challenges. What if someone modifies themselves into something dangerous? Or if enhancements provide unfair competitive edges? The ethical guidelines for assessing these technologies are still under construction. Traditional medical ethics focus on curing diseases and easing suffering, but life extension and enhancement aim to improve the human condition. Should we stick to current ethical standards or create new ones? Some say we should take the precautionary principle, go easy with technologies that have uncertain outcomes. Life extension and digital eternity come with unpredictable impacts, so better to take it slow, assess the effects, and proceed with caution. Others warn that caution has its drawbacks. Every year we delay life extension, millions who could have been saved are lost. Being overly cautious can mean missing out on good over perfect. These philosophical questions about overcoming death with technology are like age-old dilemmas, but with a modern twist. What defines personal identity? What makes life meaningful? What are the boundaries of human nature? What responsibilities do we have to future generations? Why is death seen as negative? Technology doesn't just make us think these questions through theoretically, it pushes us to resolve them in real life, because our choices will shape which technologies we pursue. Some philosophers suggest a cautious path. Humans are evolved to live around 70 years, and drastically prolonging life might bring unforeseen psychological issues. Plus, death plays key roles like adding urgency, facilitating generational succession, and keeping power from accumulating. Maybe it's wiser to accept our biological constraints rather than trying to surpass them. Opponents call this bias towards the familiar. Just because humans have always dealt with mortality doesn't mean mortality is a good thing. If technology can help reduce suffering and enhance our lives, then why not use it? Accepting death just because it's a natural part of life falls into the naturalistic fallacy. Plenty of natural things like disease, pain and death aren't good, and we use technology to tackle these issues. This debate often reveals bigger disagreements about human nature and progress. Some folks see human nature as something fixed and precious, worth preserving rather than changing. On the flip side, others think human nature is flexible and it can be improved, and that it should be enhanced. Some people are skeptical about using technology to fight mortality, while others see it as hopeful. Despite these philosophical debates, research hasn't slowed down. Scientists all around the globe work on extending life, and tech companies invest heavily in anti-aging research. The real question here isn't whether we'll attempt to lengthen lifespans, but how successful we'll be, and what the impacts might be. Philosophy can play a crucial role here by helping us understand concepts, highlighting ethical concerns, and guiding us to consider what we truly value. The idea of beating death using technology shows that our relationship with mortality is not just philosophical, but also practical. Throughout most of history, accepting death was the only choice we had. Now we have options. Should we try to extend life? By how much? Who will benefit? At what price? These aren't just technicalities. They're deeply philosophical questions about what makes life meaningful and the kind of future we want to create. Part 9. Living in the Shadow. Practical thoughts about life and death. After considering if death harms us, affects meaning, should be feared, or if we should aim for immortality, we're left with the biggest question: how should we live knowing we'll die? This is where philosophy meets real life. Theory must guide actions. Abstract ideas should shape our real-world decisions. The first practical question is how much to ponder death. We've explored how death awareness can free or freeze us, drive us forward or pull us down. The old saying, memento mori, tells us to always remember death. Yet modern psychology warns that too much fear of death isn't good. How do we find the right balance? It probably depends on the individual and the situation. Some people gain from pondering their mortality often. It makes them more focused, thankful, and real when they think about death. Others become nervous and avoidant. They do better when not fixated on it. Knowing yourself is key. You need to find out what level of death awareness helps you live your life well. For most, it's likely neither constant focus nor total denial, but somewhere in the middle. Occasionally reflecting on mortality can help reset priorities, appreciate what you have, and spur you to act on important plans. But obsessing over death stops you from truly living. The aim is to have enough awareness to be driven without being overwhelmed. Certain life events naturally draw our minds to mortality. Serious illness, losing loved ones, big birthdays, kids moving out, these events shake us from daily distractions and make us face our mortality. Philosophy encourages using these moments positively. Instead of pushing away such thoughts, sit with them. Consider what they reveal about your values and priorities. Let your awareness of mortality spark change. The second question is about spending our limited time. Given time's finiteness, how should we use it? Different philosophical schools have different takes. Utilitarianism says aim for the greatest good for the greatest number. Virtue ethics advises developing a robust character. Existentialism encourages living true to your own values. Buddhism focuses on reducing suffering and promoting compassion. These lines of thought offer varied practical advice. Utilitarianism might suggest effective altruism, using resources to help as many as effectively as you can. Virtue ethics might guide you to pursue a fulfilling career, nurture friendships, and build wisdom and courage. Existentialism might recommend questioning societal norms and making unique choices that reflect your true self. Buddhism could advise meditation, living simply and serving others. No single approach has settled this debate. Different perspectives might fit different people, or perhaps blending ideas from multiple traditions is best. What's important is having some guiding framework, rather than aimlessly drifting through life. Mortality adds value to time. Don't waste it by living without thought. One key insight from recognizing mortality is the value of relationships. As people face death, theirs or others, relationships become vital. Philosophical debates about meaning often overlook this, but real life shows us that love and connection are deeply meaningful. If you had a year left, you'd likely spend it with loved ones, not chasing achievements or arguing philosophical points. This hints that relationships should be a life priority, not put off until everything else settles. We tend to delay deep connections. I will spend more time with my kids when work slows. I will reach out to old friends when I have time. I will express my love when the moment is perfect. But work never truly calms. Time never truly frees up, and the perfect moment never quite arrives. Death is always a possibility. Live as if it's your last chance to connect with those who matter. One significant takeaway is the value of finishing things that truly matter. We dove into debates about whether leaving projects unfinished is really bad. On a practical level, though, not completing major tasks can leave people with regrets. Imagining leaving a book half written, or a relationship unresolved, or a trip unfulfilled. Those lingering thoughts can trouble someone nearing life's end. It's crucial to figure out what's really important and strive to finish those things instead of endlessly putting them off. This doesn't mean trying to cram everything into your life. Part of wisdom is recognizing that you can't pursue every opportunity or experience. You can't visit every place, read every book, or master every skill. Embracing those limits is a must. Focus on what truly matters to you within those boundaries. Avoid letting minor details steal time away from what you hold dear. Insights from those on their deathbeds reveal what people truly value. Patterns of regret often surface among the dying. Working too hard, not sharing their feelings, drifting away from friends, not staying true to themselves, and neglecting happiness. These regrets point out how we often prioritize the wrong things in life. We tend to let career goals overshadow relationships, hold back emotions for social acceptance, allow friendships to fade from neglect, conform to avoid stepping out as our genuine selves, and postpone happiness waiting for the right conditions. Philosophy urges us to turn these patterns around. Work enough to meet your needs, but avoid letting it take over your life. Don't suppress your emotions. People regret unspoken words more than spoken ones. Keep your friendships alive. They won't last on their own. Live true to your values, even if it means standing apart from social expectations. Let yourself find happiness now, instead of waiting for better scenarios that might never come. Yet following this advice isn't always easy. Economic demands often push people to work more than they'd like. Social norms can penalise those who express themselves honestly. Staying in touch with friends takes time, which many find scarce. Living by your own values is tough in environments that discourage nonconformity. Advising people to live without regrets assumes they have freedoms that aren't always available. Philosophy must recognise these obstacles but still guide people. Even with limitations, choices exist. Your response to limited options can make a difference. The Stoics believe that while you can't control everything around you, you can manage your judgments and reactions. Even in tough times, you can choose your mindset. Focus on what you can change and uphold your integrity. The issue of choosing when to die comes up for those with terminal illnesses or people extremely old. Modern medicine can prolong life indefinitely with aggressive treatments, but not all life extension is beneficial. Some reach a point where living is more painful than fulfilling. Should they then choose death? Various ethical and religious views offer different answers. Some faiths strictly oppose suicide, viewing life as sacred and only ending by divine decision. Others allow choosing death in dire circumstances, like the Stoics and Buddhists who accepted rational suicide when life was unbearable. Nowadays, medical ethics increasingly recognizes patient autonomy, allowing competent adults to refuse treatments even if it leads to death. The debate over assisted death persists. Some places permit terminal patients to receive help in dying, giving prescriptions for drugs they can use when ready. Other areas forbid such practices, forcing some to endure life even when it's overwhelmingly painful. Arguments for and against this touch on autonomy, suffering, life sanctity, and potential misuse. From a philosophical perspective, the case for assisted death champions autonomy and relief from suffering. If a person reasonably concludes their life is no longer worth living due to terminal illness and significant suffering, it seems harsh to compel them to stay. They should be allowed to depart on their terms. Critics worry about vulnerable individuals feeling pressured, medical professionals' role in ending lives, diminishing life's value and diagnostic errors. Most people dream of passing away, quietly while asleep, after a life of good health. However, with advancements in medicine, this isn't often the case. More frequently, people experience a slow decline, facing numerous health crises, hospital visits, and ultimately passing in an ICU. Although philosophy can't change these realities, it can help us ponder our desires and advocate for ourselves. Advanced directives allow you to express your medical treatment preferences if you're unable to communicate. Would you want intense resuscitation efforts, mechanical breathing support, or tube feeding? These aren't easy questions, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer. But reflecting on them while healthy lets you make decisions aligned with your values instead of leaving it to others during emergencies. Thinking about what you'll leave behind is tied to the meaning of death. What legacy do you want? For some, it's about their children and family heritage. Others emphasize their creative outputs like art, literature, or inventions. Some focus on institutions they've built up in part of, while others value the personal impact they've had on people they've influenced. Philosophy posits legacy may not be as important as we believe. Our wish to be remembered springs from our fear of death. We aim for immortality through enduring impact, since true immortality is unachievable. Yet being remembered isn't necessary for a life full of meaning. Life's worth is about how you lived it, not whether you're remembered. Plus, even renowned figures fade from memory eventually. Centuries from now, chances are no one will recall you. Eventually, the universe will experience heat death, rendering all accomplishments moot. From this cosmic outlook, focusing on legacy seems misplaced. It's better to focus on living well than on being remembered. However, legacy doesn't have to be about fame. Helping others flourish matters, even if you're not remembered. A teacher inspiring students, a parent raising children with love, or a friend offering support leaves a lasting impact without needing recognition. Legacy is about influence, not fame. Deciding to have children is partly about confronting mortality. Kids provide a sense of continuity, your genes, values, and influence living on. But is pursuing immortality through children a sound reason for having them? Using children for legacy purposes is treating them as means to an end. Children should be cherished for who they are, not as carriers of parental legacy. Still, the theme of mortality and children is intertwined. Our fleeting existence, with new generations taking our place, shapes our thoughts on children. We invest in them because they are the future, even though we won't always be around. This isn't necessarily exploitative. If we truly cherish children's well-being for their own sake, the practical aspect of grief demands attention. How do we cope with others passing? Philosophy traditionally focuses more on our own mortality than on others' deaths, but for most, losing loved ones is more immediate and painful than pondering personal mortality. Grief is love's price. The stronger the attachment, the harder the loss. Some philosophies suggest that intense grief is unnecessary, since death is natural and inevitable. Stoics advocated for accepting loss without excess emotion, yet this can seem unrealistic and perhaps even wrong. Grieving gives honour to the relationship. Denying it may imply it wasn't significant. Modern psychology sees grief as a lengthy process. Merely deciding not to grieve isn't viable through philosophical musings. The pain lessens over time but might never vanish. Philosophy can help by offering ways to understand loss, but it can't erase grief's ache. One philosophical realization is that grief stems from love. You mourn because the bond was deeply meaningful. In this way, grief isn't entirely negative, but also recognizes the relationship's value. Trying to dodge grief by avoiding close bonds is counterproductive. It's better to love and grieve deeply than to live without strong connections. Incorporating an awareness of death into our daily lives is tough. We know in our heads that we'll die, but emotionally it doesn't always feel real. It's sort of healthy because constantly thinking about death could stop us from living normally. But if we completely ignore it, we're missing out on living wisely. So how do we find the right balance? Maybe by having rituals and practices that remind us of death every now and then. Things like visiting cemeteries, showing up at funerals, marking death anniversaries, or even reading obituaries can gently nudge us towards remembering our mortality without being too intense. Different traditions have ways to keep death in mind. Buddhists meditate on death, Christians pray for the dying, and Jewish customs have specific mourning practices. In contrast, modern secular culture doesn't have strong death rituals anymore. Funerals can be quick and overly polished. We often say someone passed instead of died, and bodies are taken away to funeral homes rather than being cared for at home. This clean-up approach to death might stop us from dealing with mortality in a healthy way. Some philosophers suggest embracing the reality of death, facing it openly instead of making it a forbidden topic. Talk to kids about it. Spend time with relatives who are nearing the end. Discuss what you want for your own passing. Make death as normal a conversation topic as anything else you chat about. Such a cultural switch might help folks develop a healthier outlook on death. When faced with mortality, the question of purpose becomes urgent. With life being temporary, what's its point? Religions tend to provide solid answers like serving God, getting ready for an afterlife, or fulfilling a divine plan. But secular views have a tougher time. Without some big cosmic purpose, where do we find meaning? One secular idea is that we create purpose through our choices and values. Life might not come with built-in meaning, but we make our own by focusing on projects and relationships that matter to us. This gives us enormous responsibility, but also lots of freedom. You get to create meaning through your commitments instead of following someone else's script. Another idea revolves around well-being, flourishing by experiencing joy, reducing pain, building virtues, connecting with others, learning new things and making beautiful creations becomes life's purpose. This ties purpose to what makes us human, rather than individual choices alone. We thrive when we unlock our unique human potential. Then there's the idea of contribution, making the world a better place for others, whether through work, family, community efforts, politics, or creative input. We can make a positive impact. This kind of purpose lasts because what you've changed or contributed outlives you. These purposes aren't exclusive to each other. Living a satisfying life could mean creating personal meaning, flourishing by embracing your human potential, and contributing to others' well-being. The goal is to have some sense of purpose instead of wandering aimlessly. Mortality urges us to find purpose because our time is limited. Lastly, comes the practical question of how to die when the time arrives. Most of us hope for a peaceful departure, surrounded by loved ones without too much suffering. Yet hoping isn't the same as planning. To die well, we need some prep. It doesn't mean being fixated on death, but rather sorting practical details to face it with less stress. This preparation includes the obvious stuff like making a will, choosing someone to make medical decisions if you can't, talking over your wishes with family, and maybe even planning your funeral. Unpleasant yet essential tasks. Skipping them puts an extra load on others and ups the odds of dying in a way you wouldn't want. But dying well also involves getting ready mentally and spiritually. Making peace with your life means accepting your choices, forgiving yourself and others, wrapping up essential relationships, and dealing with any unfinished emotional stuff. Folks who tackle this while they're healthy face death with fewer regrets and fears. Avoiding it until the last minute can lead to struggles. In the end, philosophy's most useful role is helping us figure out what truly matters. Socrates famously said that a life of reflection is worth living since it allows us to align with our true values instead of just following the crowd. The fact that we won't live forever adds urgency to this process. Time is limited, so use it wisely. All the different arguments about death, from Epicurean views to ideas about deprivation, and from Heidegger's thoughts on authenticity to discussions on immortality and meaning, are here to help us focus on how we should live. The true essence of philosophy isn't about drawing final conclusions. It's about diving into thoughtful introspection. To live well as mortals, we need balance. This means being aware of death just enough to keep us motivated, but not so much that it freezes us in place. We should accept our mortality enough to avoid constant fear, while ensuring we don't become complacent. Legacy concerns ought to drive us to contribute without sacrificing our present relationships for how others might remember us. Engage with life's possibilities fully, yet understand your limitations to find peace with unfulfilled dreams. No set rules can capture this equilibrium. Each person must find it through their own reflection and trial. Philosophy offers tools, concepts and frameworks, but it's up to you to apply them in your own life. The aim is not to become a philosophical expert, but to gain practical wisdom, learning how to live well under the shadow of death. Ironically, it's death that makes life so valuable by limiting it. The pressure, energy and significance that come with knowing our time is finite aren't burdens to bear. They're gifts that life gives us. An infinite existence might miss out on these valuable experiences. Though death signifies loss and is something we naturally fear, it's not all bad. It sets the stage for what makes life meaningful. As humans, being mortal is part of our identity. Understanding ourselves involves understanding our mortality, and living well requires accepting it. Debates about death will continue alongside philosophy itself. While discussions persist, the focus remains on living practically. Death waits for all of us, including those we love. The universe is indifferent to our being here, and our time is short. These hard truths are what make life unique and precious. The real question philosophy asks is what you'll do with this understanding. The answer lies in the choices you make every day.